Hello again. This is the 8th and final session in our series on effective writing. Most people think of writing as something they do with words, and of course we do writing with words. But we also use a lot more than just words. Even if we just put a piece of paper down on the table, and write things out with our hand, we're still going to have to decide what kind of paper to use. Do we use letterhead for formal purposes and fancy linen note paper for casual purposes or intimate purposes? Do we use a small folded piece of paper in order to send a letter of condolence, and then a long 8.5 by 14 piece of paper when we want to send a legal document? Yes to all of those things. How do we know that the kind of paper we use is important? We know it's important because we've seen them used that way before. The paper conveys meaning. In fact, much about what we do when we construct a document conveys meaning without being words at all. Neatness counts, as your elementary school teacher used to say. Today's discussion is called Beyond Words. We want to talk about pictures, tables, graphs, those general considerations that may help us construct more effective documents than we could if we were limited merely to words. But of course, before we begin our focus on today's subject, we review the 6 basic areas of writing: audience and purpose, blueprinting, construction, dissent, editing, and field testing. Each of these areas has its own counterpart in considering the issues that go beyond words. Audience and purpose. Always know who your audience is and what your purpose is in addressing that audience. When you think of going beyond words, you have to ask yourself, will this person be satisfied by getting something on an ordinary piece of notebook paper? Or will this person be dissatisfied by getting something on a condolence card? It happens in many large organizations that people have access to more than one kind of stationery. If I were to send a memo from myself to a colleague in my department and used department letterhead, the colleague might not mind, but the department chair might mind because department letterhead is more costly than the general stationery we use for inter-office communication. So use a less costly piece of stationery, sometimes a more costly piece of stationery. Audience and purpose. It actually matters in figuring out how you go beyond words. In blueprinting, we have to consider audience and purpose. Oh, it's fine to have pages and pages and pages of worksheets from some word process, from some spreadsheet program, if you are using that as an appendix to an accountant who's going to decide how to advise you on your investments. But if you're sending me a note asking me whether or not I would like to send in a $10 contribution to your charity, I don't want to see pages and pages of graphs. I just want to understand what your needs are and why you've come to me. Do we put those graphs in the document? That depends on audience and purpose. Construction. How do we construct a document using things that go beyond words? We talked about having different elements in the blueprint, different materials in different arrangements. Let's say our blueprint calls for surveying the items inside the room, and we want one of those items to be a location. Perhaps a picture would help. If we want another item in the room to be, let us say, a discussion of open heart surgery, the location was an operating room, do we want to have a picture of somebody with his chest open in the middle of that document? Maybe we do, if we want to show that the current operating room will not do for this audience, the audience being the hospital administrators. But if the audience is supposed to be, let us say, potential donors to this hospital, charitable folk, maybe we don't want to scare them so much. We just want to show them the cracks in the walls in the existing operating room and talk about the importance of open heart surgery. In fact, instead of a picture, maybe we could use a graph and show what the survival rates are for people in the most modern facilities as opposed to the survival rates for people in less modern facilities. We can shuttle back and forth between audience and purpose, between purpose and audience and blueprint, between blueprint and construction, in deciding what kinds of materials to use that go beyond words. Then there's the matter of dissent. Will your audience understand your graphic? Will your table confuse your audience or help your audience? Will it give away too much information? Will it distract people? Will it get them to focus on the graphic and forget the words? Is the caption at the heart of what the graphic is intended to do? Is all of this just decoration and a waste of money, or are you getting your argument told? You have to decide. So when you have a document that goes beyond words, you must still revise with the eyes of the potentially dissenting reader. And then there's editing. We know that in editing the words, we have to make sure we get the spelling, the grammar, the mechanics, the capitalization, everything just right. What about with the graphics? Even more so with the graphics. People tend to take a split second over any individual word, but graphics condense so much information in one place that people may dwell on a graphic for lengthy periods of time. They may return to it when confused by the text. The graphic has to be just right. So you have to ask yourself clearly, have I gotten this as I want it? Does it say what I need to say? Does it distract by saying something else? Have I missed something crucial? Now, the fact is that we live in a visual world. Nowadays, with televisions, fax machines, mass production of photographs in every kind of periodical literature, instructions coming with products, with picture labels on items in the grocery store, everything seems to come with some kind of a graphic, a photo, a graph, fancy reproduction of words in large fonts or small. If we want to make our documents as effective as possible, we need to appeal to an audience that's trained to work in this visual world. In other words, we need to take our document, think about it, get it as best we can, and field test it. What are the rules for creating the best possible graphics? Unfortunately, that subject itself is at least as vast as the rules for creating the most effective writing using just words alone. However, we can still begin to approach this by thinking of what the uses are for most kinds of graphics and by paying attention to the graphics that we tend to see. So let me remind you, before we focus on them, what our key concepts are here. That all elements of all documents, that is, including the graphic elements of documents, should be treated just as we have treated the verbal elements. That is, we have to concern ourselves with audience and purpose. What particular audience, what particular purpose? We should consider all issues from connotation. Does this work with this audience and this purpose? To the types of graphic element we might use. Blueprinting, for example. To the actual drawing or creation or finding of that graphic. Construction. To clarity. Is there some dissent possible because this graphic does not quite do its job in just the perfect way? To editing for accuracy. And then finally to field testing to make sure we do have those connotations right. Every issue that we have discussed in relation to writing as if it were words alone applies equally well when we go beyond words. The world we live in is such that virtually every elementary school student can go to a public library, find a newspaper or magazine article on a subject that he or she wants to write about, photocopy a picture from the magazine, and include it in his or her report. There's no reason to feel limited by words. We can, we should go beyond words. Here are some of the ways we can do that. We can use pictures, tables, and graphs. We can use them, I would think, for about 8 purposes, and these are listed in your course booklet. We can use them to engage the reader, to attract the reader's attention. We can use them to guide the reader, and also, in fact, if the guide is useful, perhaps to guide the writer, so that the graphic and the work that it works with are created simultaneously. We can use graphics to present data. We can use graphics to display additional data beyond that discussed in the text, in the written text. We can use graphics to clarify a situation. It's very hard to describe exactly what a widget looks like, but a picture of one would go a long way. We can use graphics to present an argument. Some things are much clearer when seen visually than when described in words. We can use a graphic to prompt discussion. That is, we can have some action taken with the people with whom we're dealing initiated by asking them to focus first on something we put before them, a table, a graph, a picture. And finally, we can use graphics to aid memory. That is, after we've had our discussion with our potential client, with our teacher or student, with our colleague, the piece of paper we take away to help us remember what we just decided need not be just a bunch of words. It could be a picture, a table, or a graph. 8 uses then: to engage the reader, to guide the reader, to present data, to display additional data, to clarify, to present an argument, to prompt discussion, and to aid memory. Now what I'd like to do is exemplify each of these. Engage the reader. How many times have you seen in a magazine an advertisement for some product, and it says on the advertisement, "as seen on TV"? Is the product any better because it was seen on TV? I have no idea. My guess is, however, no. Why does it say, "as seen on TV"? In fact, in TV Guide magazine, many of the ads will have a little text box that says, "as seen on TV" in bold colors. What for? They are believing that people who watch TV value what's on TV. They're catching their attention with this little graphic. That little text box is in the shape of a TV screen. The bold colors are to simulate the color picture that someone might see. The graphic doesn't add directly to the argument, but it engages the reader. In the same way, many ads these days for comparatively advanced technological equipment, whether it be a car or a watch or some new process, will have a little picture of a computer somewhere in it. In fact, there's a television ad that talks about analgesics, painkillers, and someone comes along and says, "This painkiller has been found to be more effective than the others," pushes a button on a computer that's sitting there on the set, and a graphic comes up showing a table comparing the effectiveness of the product being advertised with the effectiveness of the competition. Why is that table shown on a computer? Why doesn't the television set simply show the table in larger format, filling the whole TV screen? Because the computer is a graphic element, and it has connotations. Its connotation is, this is forefront science. This is the stuff that's right. And so the graphic of the computer is worked into the document. In this case, the document is a television ad. The same process could be done, however, in your own document. You could have a picture of a computer when you're beginning to discuss things technically. Should you do it? Depends on your audience. You don't want to condescend to them, but on the other hand, maybe you want to use that as the way you would use a keyword. Wherever you have technical discussions, a little computer in the margin. Wherever you have more humanistic discussions, a tree in the margin, perhaps. And help your reader get guided through the document by these graphic elements. They help engage the reader. They do it in very interesting ways. Take a look in your course booklet or on the screen at this Hytran ad. Now, this Hytran ad says, next rest stop, 40 miles. And the text says, of someone speaking, "I had a tough time going the distance." That's good writing. Going the distance means, it's a phrase, it's an idiom, and it means sticking to it to the end. It's something that we talk about with people who have great perseverance. He went the distance. He met the challenge. He rose to the occasion. I had a tough time going the distance. Talks about someone who wants to be tough, but it's tough to be tough. Why is that? Because, it turns out, the person is stuck in a car and needs to urinate. He can't go the physical distance, that is, can't spend the time between rest stops. Hence the sign, next rest stop, 40 miles. This is a delicate subject to discuss. And Hytrin does not want to make people who have a problem that their product can help alleviate, feel embarrassed. So they don't show a picture of somebody squirming. They don't show a picture of somebody shamefaced. They have a single line, "I had a tough time going the distance," that suggests we've got some tough individual here who's doing his best. And then a very comfortable highway sign, "Next rest stop, 40 miles." That sign is a graphic. In fact, that graphic is even smarter than it might appear at first blush. That sign could have said, "Next rest stop, 47 miles, or 29 miles, or any number of miles." Why does it say 40 miles? Somewhere in the back of many people's minds, the number 40 has a special significance. It has a special connotation. In the Bible, it rained and rained for 40 days. And then after that, the earth was radically different, and Noah was able to land, and a new covenant was made, according to the Bible, between God and humanity. When the Hebrews left Egypt, they wandered in the desert for 40 years before they came to the promised land. In instance after instance in the Bible, Old Testament and New, Jesus is tempted for 40 days in the wilderness. 40 is the number that symbolically represents a time of great trial and then radical transformation. It happens that this particular number took on this particular use because of an interesting astronomical fact. In the latitudes of the old world, of the Holy Land, the greatest astronomers practiced in the observatory of Babylon. From that latitude, there is a constellation known as the Pleiades, which dips below the horizon at just about the beginning of winter. That is, when we get to the shortest day of the year. And that constellation does not appear above the horizon again until 40 days later. So the disappearance in the darkest time of the year and rebirth of the Pleiades came to be an astronomical symbol for suffering, transformation, and rebirth. And that number, 40, became, in the writings of the Holy Land, the number for renewal, suffering and renewal. Next rest stop, 40 miles. Now, I don't suggest that the writers of this ad really picked the number 40 thinking about the Bible. But they must have thrown out a whole bunch of numbers to each other when they decided what they wanted to put on that sign. 37, 41, 58. And finally, sitting around, they must have said, 40 sounds good. Let's use 40. Someone may or may not have said it has a biblical ring to it. But the fact is, it does have connotations. Why am I taking so long to talk about one sign? Because you notice, looking in your course booklet or looking on the screen, you're not going to go and reread the text alongside that sign. Once you've gone through that advertisement once, the graphic dominates you. The graphic has the most powerful impact, the most lasting impact. Graphics have to be thought out with extraordinary care. If they work spectacularly. There are other ways in which you can engage the reader. You can, for example, use clever designs like this. Here's a windowed document. It says, just think you've got 90 days to make a decision. And there is a famous picture of a statue called the Thinker. But when you open the document up, it turns out that that was a window, and we see the Thinker again on the inside. By creating a window, we both have the possibility of the same icon functioning in two places. So the picture of the Thinker has now become a key term. And we have the idea that the person is entering into a time of decision. He or she is going through some window. Very subtle, clever graphic design. All of these things, the use of the computer, the 40, as seen on TV, windowing documents, different colored and textured papers. These are things done to engage the reader. You want to do that. You can also guide the reader. Remember we said that in long documents, we should construct things so as to have sort of a pyramid, with the smallest part being the executive summary, The main document itself being, say, the proposal, and then appended matter if we need it. Perhaps only a little bit, but perhaps an enormous amount, making that pyramid. How do you guide someone through this? You guide people through this by giving them tables of contents, appendices, all sorts of things. Now, when we do that, we are not only establishing a principle for the reader, we're establishing a principle for the writer. If you look in your course booklet, you'll find the user's guide, that is, you'll find a page to be presented in the user's guide to SoftCrunch 3. It's a manual. SoftCrunch 3 actually doesn't exist. It's a computer program I made up, and you can think of it as doing whatever you like. Let's take a look at this diagram. You can see that it begins with a title, User's Guide to the SoftCrunch 3 Manual. That title extends across the page, its left margin lined up with the left margin of introduction, and its right margin lined up with the descending line going down the right. The fact that it lines up with the left margin of introduction and then none of the other boxes is that far to the left may suggest that the introduction really is the thing most to the left. As anybody who works in newspapers knows, the upper left-hand part is the place where everyone's eyes start, because we're trained to read English up to down and left to right. The left-hand lead is most important. The introduction is most important. Now, we say, introduction, welcome to SoftCrunch 3, and we have an arrow going down. It points to only one box. Have you used a cruncher before? Whatever a cruncher might be. If the answer is no, then you are suggested to proceed by the little arrow to read Chapter 1, Cruncher Basics. If the answer is yes, it's suggested that you descend to the next box, which says, have you used an earlier version of SoftCrunch? If the answer is no, it's suggested that you read Chapter 2, What SoftCrunch Can Do For You. But if the answer is yes, it's suggested that you read Chapter 3, Improvements in SoftCrunch 3. Notice I've chosen two different kinds of boxes here. The question boxes that require the user or reader to decide yes or no are simple text boxes. The boxes that suggest the reading of particular text are shadowed boxes. The introduction has a shadow, read Chapter 1 has a shadow, and so on down the line. By having the difference between the kinds of boxes conveyed visually, even if my reader, or you might say user, someone paying attention to a flowchart, doesn't consciously recognize the difference between the two kinds of box, unconsciously the person will respond to those differences. I've constructed the graphic in such a way that someone can go away and come back later and just say, now, where was I supposed to read? You notice also that I've lined up the read Chapter 1, 2, and so on in a single column, so that people can decide to read by going straight down. Of course, one could read any book from beginning to end. Introduction, right down from chapters 1 through 9. But then at the bottom of this flowchart, we have a listing called Reference Tools. The Reference Tools box, like the User's Guide box at the very top, is a simple box, not a shadow box, and it has its margins aligned so that they are parallel to two different shadow boxes. That is, two different boxes that suggest particular possibilities of reading. One shadow box is appendix, and one shadow box is index. Notice, there are no arrows going from the reference tools box down to appendix and index. What does that suggest? It suggests that as you use this guide, this manual, to SoftCrunch 3, you should follow the arrows down. But you shouldn't follow the arrows to the appendix or to the index. Use those as you decide they're necessary, hence no arrows. So the choice of having arrows at all also was a choice in how to communicate information to the reader. It tells the reader implicitly that the appendix and index are for free use. Let's take a look at what these particular arrows say. Read Chapter 1, Cruncher Basics. Read Chapter 2, What SoftCrunch Can Do For You. Read Chapter 3, Improvements in SoftCrunch 3. These are all the things that you would read if you had said, no, I haven't used a cruncher before, or no, I haven't used Soft Crunch. But if I have used Cruncher or Soft Crunch, still I'm asked to read something. I'm asked to read at least Chapter 3, Improvements in Soft Crunch 3. And then no matter whether I've read Chapter 1, or 2, or 3, the arrows carry me across to the right and down to another question. Will you be using Soft Crunch or only administering it? Will you be the person in charge of it on a network, or will you, in fact, be using it? If the answer is that you will use it, then you really need to read through the whole next 4 chapters, chapters 4 through 8, using Soft Crunch. But if you're only going to administer it, then you need to go to Chapter 9, Administering Soft Crunch. Without even reading the manual, I can already tell, as you can, that whoever designed Soft Crunch designed it in such a way that the administrator does not have to be familiar with the details of the use of the program. That's a pretty clever design idea. It's a design idea captured by this graphic. It may be a good sales tool for the company that makes Soft Crunch. After you've read chapters 4 through 8 using Soft Crunch, you get another arrow, now wrapped back to the left, hence the use of arrowheads to overcome our normal English habit of reading left to right. Now we're going right to left. Will you be administering Soft Crunch? If yes, you too need to read Chapter 9. If no, just be aware that we have reference tools. If you had said you're only going to administer and not use, you would have read Chapter 9, and after that you too would have been told, please be aware, we have reference tools. So the design of this represents a flow of use. This is a very, very helpful kind of chart. This is not just decoration to the manual. This is what makes the manual usable. It shows respect for your reader. It minimizes the reader's necessary investment of time. Now, what are those reference tools? The appendix, it says, is a command reference. If you can't remember how Soft Crunch does something, you can look these things up. And if you don't remember what it is that's going on, but you have some general question, you look in the more thorough index to the manual. Designing something like this, like the User's Guide to Soft Crunch 3, that is to the manual of Soft Crunch 3, is not just an exercise in decoration. It helps you think through how you should write the manual. So we're back to our old story. Whatever you do in creating a document, if you want it to be as effective as possible, you do it in a dialectic way. Having developed this flowchart for how people could best use the manual, you might then want to revise your blueprint so that it corresponds to this flowchart, a dialectic back and forth at all stages. Now, tables of contents, appendices, and so on all guide the reader. Sometimes, however, all we want to do is present the reader with more data. We can do that, for example, by taking data and putting it in tabular form. Take a look in your course booklet or on the screen to see a table which lists first, second, through fourth quarters across the top and 4 different regions, east through south. What we have there is a lot of data. Why was it in the document? I don't know. I do know it's a little difficult to read. We could improve it by putting lines, grid lines on it so that we could know exactly which datum pertained to which intersection of quarter and region. But even if we did, we wouldn't know exactly what to make of it. It's a little difficult. We are presenting the data, but more data need to be presented. How can we do that? How can we go and give better presentations? Well, one of the ways is to label the data more helpfully. Take a look at the sample student grade sheet, the complicated student grade sheet for English 230 Section 10. Now, this is actually a real grade sheet that I've used, but I've changed all the names so that they won't reflect any of my actual students. On the top, we see each column labeled. Student name. ABS stands for absences. Half a day, 2 days, whatever. Part means participation. I assign a participation grade on a 4-point scale, 4 being an A, 2 being a C, 0 being an E or F. E at the University of Michigan, F at some other institutions. Paper 1 is the grade the student received on the first paper on that 4-point scale. Paper 2 is the grade the student received on the second paper on the 4-point scale. Journal is a written journal, quite extensive as it happens, that students have to keep, and under there we have the grades on a 4-point scale earned on the journal. Each of these things, participation, paper 1, paper 2, and journal, count for a certain weight in the course as a whole, and so a formula derives the total number of points they get in the next to last column, and those points then translate to a letter grade. 3.34 at the top, for example, for Ellen Allman, is rounded out to a 3.3, which is a B+. This is a lot of data, and most students would be interested only in the last column, what was my particular grade. But if I were using this grade sheet to talk to my colleagues about how the class as a whole went, I very well might want to add another line on the bottom. Take a look at the next version of this graph, the one that has 28 at the bottom. Here we have averages. The average absence was 1.63, it says. And then we look up and see that one person was absent 6.5 times. We know that something is very wrong with the participation of that individual. We look across to the bottom right and see that the average grade was 3.19, better than a B, but less than a B+. Is that what we think the average should be in that class as a whole? We weren't able to ask that question just looking at the data. And just having the bottom line, we might not have faith that we understand the details of how those numbers were derived. But putting that bottom line as part of the larger table makes possible constructing much more detailed and persuasive arguments. In fact, one can put many things on tables. One picture is worth 1,000 words. Pictures, in other words, clarify. Take a look again at the quarterly table that we have, but this time compare it with the bar graph representing the same data. Here it becomes clear that in the third quarter, the eastern region was by far the most productive. By far. But overall, it seems clear that the north region holds steady no matter whether the other regions go up or down. This may lead to some very interesting theorizing about what should be the company's sales strategy. Those possibilities were invisible in the data as presented as numbers, but they become immediately visible when presented as bar graphs. That's why spreadsheet programs allow us to manipulate the numbers into different kinds of graphs. Bar graphs, pie charts, what have you. Each of you who is used to using such a program will know what the options are. I implore you to explore them and find out how best to present your story. Use numbers, use graphics, that is, to clarify the situation. If you would like to see how this can be done extraordinarily, take a look at this graph by Menard. This is thought to be the most perfect graphical display, visual display of data ever made by experts in the field. This particular graph says in French, figurative map of the successive losses of people by the Army of France in the Russian campaign of 1812 to 1813, prepared by Monsieur Menard, Inspector General of Bridges and Highways, during the retreat. Now, what do we have on this graph? To see it well, you'll have to look at it in the booklet, because so much information is in it. But even on the screen, you can see the width of this line, in fact, shows us how many people are in the Army. The line becomes narrower and narrower and narrower as the Army loses people. The line is lighter colored as they move toward Moscow, says that in French there, Moscou. And then as the French Army retreats, the line changes to black to represent the idea that the French have been defeated. In fact, not only do we have the successive diminution of the Army shown by the change in the width of the diagram, but we also have the geographic movement of the Army shown, because this is a movement from the Rhine to Moscow, and this east-west orientation truly represents the movements of the Army. And the up-down orientation of the graph represents the north-south movements of the Army. So here we find a piece of the Army split off, and then later retreated and rejoined the retreating main body of the Army. Hence this line became thicker than this line as they come back together. We have then a display of geographic data, a display of Army population, a display of movement. In addition, here we can see dates. And so we have the dates. Notice the lines go up only to the black line, not to the lighter line. We have the dates of the retreat, so we can tell where the Army was at what time. And then down here, we have a table of temperatures in degrees centigrade. And that table of temperatures is drawn to show us the relative changes of temperature on those same dates, so that we can see the degree to which the losses of the Army, as they moved across the landscape, reflected the severity of the weather that was suffered by the French Army. This is an absolutely extraordinary graphic. It's a graphic that conveys more information than one could possibly put in any ordinary document, that is, in an ordinary document that would hold anyone's attention. But once having created that graphic, the reader can sit with it, work with it, think through it. It's really a spectacular demonstration of how imagination and cleverness can get much across in a way that will support almost any kind of argument when one understands it well. You can present many arguments in graphical data, and you do not have to be a world-famous graph maker to do it. Let's take a look again at the grade sheets for that class. In this third version, we've taken the grade sheet and we've highlighted the line that says points. Having highlighted the line that says points, the student's intention to look over at the grades is somehow undercut, and my audience, in this case my colleagues, is drawn to something else, that there is a point spread. That is, I want them to look at those numbers in some detail. Notice that only one of the numbers in the points column goes above a 4. Even though A pluses are allowable, 4.3, only one person has a total number of points, a total weighted average of points, I should say, above A. But also notice that nobody has an weighted average below 2. So the spread among the points is not nearly as high as one might expect if the class had a wide range of activity. We've learned something about the class by looking at the spread of their actual points. Their average is 3.21, as we see below. That's a shade lower than the 3.19 average when those points were converted to letter grades. Is that something to worry about? Has the class been shortchanged? 0.02 of a letter grade. I think probably not. Is it important to realize that the class behavior was not as various in its success as possible? Perhaps so. Now, that may be that we want to draw a positive result from that. We may say, it's good. There was a lot of conversation. The students learned from each other, so they tended toward common behaviors. We may want to say, we asked the students to interact too much, and the excellent people were somehow held down. How do we know if they were held down? Well, if the class average were low, that might suggest that the excellent people didn't pull it up as they otherwise might have. If the class average were high, then we might say, nope, we don't have to worry about that. It was good that they talked. In fact, the class average was not low. It was moderately high, almost a B+, and so we now know how to assess the teaching in that course. Let's take another look at that same graph. Now we've highlighted not only the points column, but two other places. We've highlighted Joy Larned's grades, and we've highlighted Susanna Yamamoto's grades. Why have we done this? I want to call attention to the fact that in those two cases, the grade on the journal is less than the final grade, and in only those two cases. What can I argue from this? I can argue that for most students, the grade on the journal being higher than the overall grade suggests that doing the work on the journal is an easier task for the students to excel at than the other tasks, the papers. Does that mean that we should give the journal less weight because it's easy? Perhaps that means we should give the journal more weight because it seems to be a pedagogically sound teaching method. Either way, we only understand that we should approach that problem, approach the question of how to use the journal, when we understand the special role that it has. By highlighting, I've picked out certain places to show what the overall thing may mean. A graphic can do this much better than words themselves. You can prompt discussion using a graphic. Now, here is a graphic that I think is well worth looking at to prompt discussion. It's really rather amazing. It suggests that prices on the New York Stock Exchange follow a certain pattern in the year 1929, from January through December, which pretty much parallels the prices on the London Stock Exchange. That's not, of course, a very unusual supposition. Stock markets are tied together by worldwide economic activity, and this was particularly true in 1929 as we approached the crash, that descending line that you see for both. But what's that middle line there? The middle line turns out to be the map of the relative solar radiation coming into the Earth at exactly the same time. But that solar radiation map has been reversed. It's upside down. Now, isn't it amazing that the New York and London stock exchanges exactly follow the inverse of solar radiation? Yep, it's amazing. In fact, it's an absolutely flat-out coincidence. I have never found anybody who knew any way that that could be explained as a causal relationship. One of the interesting things about going beyond words is that you can show things that may have no bearing whatsoever on the truth. That reminds me of that computer I saw in the ad for an automobile. The computer may have had nothing to do with the automobile, but it just told you that the people who made this ad are really up to the minute in science. That's what's going on. We're prompting discussion. Now, you can also use graphics as a memory aid. For example, we have been using the same memory aid throughout this series of discussions, the ABCs of effective writing, which you see on your screen now, and which in a more complete form is in your course book. Why did I design it that way? Audience and purpose, blueprinting, construction, descent, edit, field test, A, B, C, D, E, F. Everyone who knows how to write at all knows the alphabet. Everyone who knows how to write knows the order of the alphabet. Given nothing else to do, one approaches this problem of writing in this order. But what I've tried to say throughout these 8 lectures is that whatever we do, we want to be prepared to be dialectic, to take a look at one thing and let it change another. Look at the choice of just the right word and let that go back and change our key term. Changing the key term, adjust the blueprint. Realizing the blueprint is different, go back and reconsider the audience and purpose. All of this is in a dialectic. All 6 of these work together. Audience and purpose, blueprint, construction, descent, edit, field test. And hence, I put them in a circular diagram with a little instruction in the middle to remind one that they all do work together. But there are 8 lectures here, and there are some special issues that need to be addressed as well. Hence the other 2 boxes, going beyond words, which we're discussing today, and choosing just the right words. Further to the left, we did this in the last lecture, getting those words exactly right by using those special tools. Here what we have is a memory aid, and in fact my students in industry tell me that they keep this diagram on the front of their desks after they've had the course because they find it helps them remember exactly what they ought to be thinking of next as they proceed. There are other kinds of memory aids. For instance, this course is brought to you by the teaching company. And the teaching company uses a logo which you've seen again and again, and which will show again when this lecture is over. That logo is a torch. It looks like liberty. It reminds us of the Statue of Liberty. It reminds us not only of the light of learning, but of the land of opportunity. It's a very clever design, and it's a design made to have us think that through knowledge we can come to have a better life, that somehow this is part of the ideals that Americans all subscribe to. Having that logo come up at the beginning and the end is a memory aid. It lets us know what we're speaking of. How can we do an exercise with going beyond words? You have to use your imagination. You have to be willing to draw, use a program, a drawing program, Xerox something out of a magazine. What I'd like you to do is review a lot of documents, both those you have created and those that you've received from other people. Discover one of those that you feel could be improved by the addition of a picture or a table or a graph to some existing part of the text, or even the substitution of a picture, table, or graph for part of the existing text. Now create or find that picture or table or graph. Write a good, coherent essay using everything you've learned about effective writing of no more than 2 pages on how you decided which picture, table, or graph to use or substitute and why that particular picture, table, or graph. Then take that essay, the original document, and the document with its revised picture, table, or graph, and share that with a friend. Field test it. Get some reactions. Or if you're looking at these lectures as part of a course, send that package in to your instructor and see what your instructor says. I think by now you'll find you really are doing effective writing.